Perfect, thanks so much. Okay, everyone, we're going to get started. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Ellen, and I'm a programs intern with Sahiyo. We're very excited to host this webinar, Understanding Social Norms to End Female Genital Cutting. Just to let you know, this event is being recorded and the link will be made available to you in the coming weeks. We can move to the next slide, please. So our organization, Sahiyo's mission, is to empower Asian and other communities to end female genital cutting and create positive social change through dialogue, education, and collaboration based on community involvement. By working toward an FGC-free world, Sahiyo aims to recognize and emphasize children and women's rights and enable a culture in which female sexuality is not feared or suppressed, but embraced as normal. And we can go to the next slide, please, Meg. So to start out today, I'm going to give a quick introduction to our topic. We'll then get a sneak peek of a new video created by one of our speakers. Following the video, we'll begin our panel discussion. This will be followed by an audience Q&A. We'd like to make this as interactive as possible and would love to hear from you. So to ask a question, please submit it in our Q&A box. We'll be selecting a few of them to be answered by our panel as time allows. We'll also be monitoring the chat box during our event, so if you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And we can go to the next slide, please, Meg. Thanks so much. So what is female genital cutting? Female genital cutting, also known as FGC or FGM, involves the total or partial removal of female genitalia and other injury to the female genital organs for non-medical reasons. FGC has been performed on at least 200 million girls and women. Despite being internationally recognized as a human rights violation and an extreme form of gender-based violence, over 4 million girls remain at risk of undergoing the practice each year. Currently, under goal number 5 of the UN Sustainable Development Goals for Gender Equality, the UN is striving for full abandonment of FGC by the year 2030. But for this to happen, a lot more work must be done on this issue, including talking about interventions and activist strategies, which is why we are hosting this event today. So we can move on to the next slide, please, Meg. Many campaigns and efforts to tackle FGC have focused mainly on reporting and promoting the negative health consequences of the practice. The idea being that people would stop performing FGC if they were aware of its negative impact on health and well-being. However, research and impact reports show that more comprehensive approaches to tackling FGC are needed, calling for a holistic understanding of the custom. As FGC is a collective practice, we must work toward building a world where social norms do not allow it to continue. In 2016, Sahiyo conducted a study on how prevalent FGC was in the global Bora community and found that 81% of participants stated they wanted the practice to end. In the past 10 years, a growing number of campaigns to address FGC have focused on the social norms approach. And this webinar aims to explore this approach in more detail. And we can go on to the next slide, please. Our event today will be moderated by Sahiyo co-founder Arifa Johari. Based in Mumbai, Arifa is an activist against FGC and an award-winning journalist. For our distinguished guest speakers, we're delighted to have Maryan Abdikadir and Melching. Maryan is the co-chair of the End FGM Canada Network. She is deeply involved in the End Fgmc agenda and shares her personal experience to educate communities. Melching is founder of the international NGO Toston. Toston implements a holistic education program that has engaged over 3,000 rural African communities in cross-cutting themes of democracy, human rights and responsibilities, health, literacy, project management skills, and early childhood development. Full bios for our speakers can be found on our blog at sahiyo.org. So when we move on to the next slide, we'll now be watching a video from our Voices to End FGMC project. This project was a joint storytelling initiative created by Story Centre and Sahiyo, and the project aims to enhance the well-being of survivors by bringing them together to share their experiences. As mentioned, this video has not been published yet, so we're very grateful to Maryan for sharing it with us and allowing a sneak preview. So Meg, if we can share this video, that would be great.
Not this video, Meg. This is Maryan's video is the other one.
Thanks, Sarah.
Perfect. Sorry, everybody.
The day my friend told me she was not cut, I was so shocked. I was 19, she was 21. I told her that because she had not been cut, her prayers and fasting were not accepted in our faith. This is what people in the community had said to me. I also started looking at my friend with new eyes. We were told the girl who was not cut would become loose and run madly after men. We were told the organs of the genitalia grow long, making the girl walk with legs wide apart to avoid her thighs wrapping her elongated clitoris, and that she would smell bad. I often pretended to be tying my shoes so I could watch and see if she did walk that way. But there was no sign of this. She was not smelly either. 14 years later, I got the correct information. Female genital mutilation in all its types has no basis in Islam. I was liberated from the lie that it is a requirement. I decided to say no to Fgmc. I took a position at a reproductive health organization to end FGM. When I was blessed with a daughter of my own, I knew she was a gift for the work I was doing to end this cutting. But I was not prepared for the challenges. Many relatives told my daughter, "You are going to smell. Snakes will grow down there if you're not cut." I got tired telling them to back off and send them packing out of my house. I felt like everything I told my daughter about how I would protect her would be overtaken by what others said about her not being cut. With all of this, she was even growing to hate her body. It hurt me to see her terrified eyes. I ended up leaving Kenya and moving to Canada to protect her. I may have saved my daughter from the physical pain of FGMC, but I could not save her from the hateful words of those who still believe in this practice. I could not save her from the verbal cut.
So thanks again to Maryan for sharing this powerful video with us. I'm now going to hand over to Arifat to begin our panel discussion. I'd also like just to say that Molly had some technical difficulties joining, so hopefully she'll get that sorted soon. But just to hand over to Arifat to launch the discussion.
Thank you so much, Ellen, for the introduction, and thank you to everyone who's joined in the audience for your patience. We started off with a delay, and unfortunately, Molly is still having some technical issues. So we will wait a bit for her. But I'd like to get started with responding to that really beautiful and powerful video that Maryan has created. And Maryan, you tell your story in such a poignant way, and it also offers such a powerful illustration of the topic that we're discussing today, of how social norms have such a strong hold over our lives, whether we choose to follow them or not to follow them. So I'd like to begin by inviting you to talk a bit about your video. Why did you choose to make it? What was your experience with it?
Thank you very much, Arefa. Thank you, Eileen and Kate and everyone from Sahiyo team and everyone who has joined us today. Hello and welcome. I really appreciate the opportunity that I got this last January and February to be part of the Sahiyo and Story Center cohort to tell a story a bit from my life with FGM. And I think initially when I attended that, I was part of the group, like the first day I was really like shocked to know that I was expected to tell a story in 3 minutes. And I was like, how, you know, I have a whole ocean of stories, but I'm happy with how that story has come out, because that story tells a lot in itself. And it's just a chip from my life with FGM. I chose the verbal cut because it's, and I call it that because I believe words are powerful, words cut deep, just like razor, knife, anything. And I really was shocked, like with what I had to face, especially with my daughter. But if you listen to this story, you see 3 me's. There are 3 of me in here. There's the me who was there before having the conversation with this friend of mine, before getting shocked that she was not cut. So I had swallowed hook, line, and sinker everything that I was told about FGM, all the things I was told, the beliefs, the stories, whatever, you know, like girls would smell, their organs would grow long, they'll be loose, which means they'll be prostitutes. That is actually exactly the word that is used in my community. And so there was that me. Then I met this friend of mine, and I was shocked because a young woman in her 20s and a Muslim, not cut. I was brought up knowing this was the norm in all Muslim communities. It's only that the difference happens because of culture, the different cultures that we come from. And so it was a big shocker for me. And you can literally see I'm playing out everything, all the voices that were in my head, trying to see if those things were true. Was she walking in a wobbly style? Her legs, were they wide apart? Was she actually throwing herself at the friends and the brothers that were with us in campus? Was she loose? Because before that, I never had all those doubts. She was this very nice friend of mine whom we were trying to study and also represent ourselves and whatever we believed in, whichever way we could. So we were just being young Muslim girls in a multitude of a non-Muslim environment. And I had never had any doubt about who she was. But when she told me she was not cut, for me, those are the things that began playing, because that's how indoctrination happens. That's how, as a child, you're meant to suck in everything until you take this to be okay and acceptable. Then I got a daughter. And at that time, when I was getting my daughter, actually, I was this huge educator. I was out. I was telling my story. I was convincing communities, doing research, working in the policy and legal arena in my country, Kenya. But I was not prepared that I would have a challenge in my own home. Like my daughter would be told things, and every day I had to debrief her. But I reached a point where her questioning look actually told me she wasn't believing so much what I was telling her. It's like these other voices were taking over. And I knew I could protect my daughter from the physical pain of going through FGM, but I couldn't protect her from people's words. I could not protect her from the damage they were doing. I could not protect her from how that was now impacting in how she looked at herself and how she even looked at me. So I wanted to just go and take her somewhere where there are no reminders. No one will tell her you'll grow snakes and scare her. It's something that still terrifies her to this date, and we still talk about it and still debrief out of her, and I still, we keep talking about how that is untrue. This story, actually, I'm glad that you guys chose it, because it really just sets us right into today's topic. Because look at how much FGM was an okay thing. It was an acceptable thing. It was the thing to be done for me at that age, a young girl in university. So this is how this thing is sold to us. So I'm glad that this story has come together and you've been able to give people that sneak peek.
No, exactly. I mean, I want to pick up on that point that you made, that your story really is a great way to begin this discussion today. How we we talk a lot about how FGC is a social norms, and as a co-founder of Sahiyo, I can attest to that. Like Sahiyo uses the social norms approach in our work to end FGC as well, just as Molly's organization Tostan does. And it will be great when Molly is able to join so she can talk more at length about this. But I just want to step back for the benefit of everyone who's joined us today. How exactly do we define social norms? We know that the social norms are basically traditions that have just been passed on in our cultures, in our communities, rituals and traditions that we simply must follow without really questioning, because they must be followed, and we're taught not to question them. And when we know that this is a social norm, because if you don't follow it, then there are negative consequences. So there are positive you have positive reinforcements for following them and negative ones for not following them. And you and your daughter had to face the negative consequences of choosing to oppose a social norm that was so deeply ingrained in your community. And it's the same in so many communities that practice FGC around the world, and that when you don't follow it, you still have to face the consequences of that norm. And it's heartbreaking to think that your daughter still experiences the fear that of all of that was said to her in childhood. While we wait for Molly, perhaps Maryan, you could tell us a little bit about your work since you moved to Canada. I mean, you had to even take that step to move out of your country and out of your community in order to keep your daughter safe. So in your activism work, how is it that you employ the social norms approach? How is it that you engage with the issue of social norms while you work to end FGC?
Yeah, sorry, I was mute. Thank you for that definition and overview. I think you've really covered what social norms are. It's just these behaviors that actually apply to all of us, whether individuals or a large group in a particular context, of course. And we all get into this phrase and frenzy of thinking we are supposed to, we are expected, we have to. And that becomes even a dangerous and life-threatening issue like FGM to be okay, to be acceptable, to be the norm, to be done, to be carried out. And for a mother who herself was taken through, not to focus on the pain and the suffering and the negative outcomes, but focus on the supposed reasons for which it's done, which of course all of them are unfounded and untrue. And that's how powerful social norms are. They make the ugly beautiful, they make the untrue to be the truth, they make the unjust to be just. So it's just really taking something that is totally wrong in all facets and making it okay. And it's across the board. There are different norms for different people. So this is one norm that we are looking at, and across the communities that practice in the 92 countries where it is practiced, it is a norm. It's okay for those communities to do it. So personally, right now where I am, all I do is I'm an independent activist, and I also sit in the board for End FGM Canada Network. I'm a co-chair. And for me, I do a lot of activism and a lot of work on my social media spaces. And even though most of the still majority of my messages would be like, someone could say it's so much leaning on the community I come from, because 98% practice is not a mean number. And doing this, so for me, I still feel for those young girls who are there and everywhere, wherever they are. So one of the things that I actually have been doing the last 1 year is to really demystify and so that people are able to name the clitoris in my community. It's called the kintir. Just to be able to write and to say it and to voice it, so that people get over this ouch and begin to for it to be unacceptable. And I had a huge backlash, a huge social media backlash on that, on all sorts of name calling, and to the extent, yeah, like my mom would always come back to that, and whenever we talk, and I'm even saying hi, she's like, "Oh, you're still on that path. You've still chosen to embarrass me. You know, why would you even want to talk about, you know, should even name this part?" So not naming the part of the genitalia is part of the social norm of really having shame on these organs that are functional, that are beautiful, that have been created for a purpose. And so mine was actually to demystify that. I really wanted that demystified. And by just touching on that bit, I was able to now bring in all the other narratives and scripts and all the other values that are attached to this practice, which is totally what actually makes a social norm, you know, stand on its feet. So, for example, when they say it's not a big deal, a little bit of it has to be cut. So what is this a little bit that is to be cut? Which part are we talking about, and how little is that, and why should that little happen? So all those conversations now, and it will always go back to one of the big lies that there's some little part, some cutting that is required in Islam. So again, it opens that box and an opportunity to be able to have those conversations, which of course led me directly into getting into loggerheads with one of the scholars that has a big following among my community. I call him the Somali Pope, and like it got to being very personal, and being branded to be someone who's being used to, you know, who's an agent for. You guys know when you're an activist and when you face these things, you all get all these names, brandings, you know, you are an agent, you're being used, you've corrupted the community and this and that. But I think just that element of sticking with really wanting to talk about the clitoris and calling the Kinter talk. If you see hashtag Kinter talk on my social media and everywhere, so it became to a point where today, when I do not post anything, some people ask me, Mama K, you know, Madam K, without them saying it in full for some of them, and some of them actually putting it in full. We have not heard of you talking or you writing anything or you saying anything about Mr. K, Mr. Kinter. And I'm like, thank you. I'm happy that you are able to say this and you know, to name and to voice. So for me, that strategy enabled me to start now talking about all this, like, you know, it's not valuable, it's not too much pain, it is required in Islam. Girls would run mad and they will run after men and they'll be loose and they'll dishonor themselves and they'll bring dishonor to the family and to the community. And so just that one element has enabled me to continue talking about and demystify all these norms and really showing that it is not true. And I think just the fact that I'm able to voice and talk about my story and put it out there, there are a few who accept and appreciate, and those who are opposing, but there's a majority here that is really quiet, and you can actually tell, like, people are beginning to really like pay attention and say, oh my goodness, you know, what has really been happening, like the lie that there's a little bit of this cutting that is required is not actually there. So we have to be able to demystify the value attached to this practice. And I think the ignorance that everyone does it and everyone is expected to do and everyone must do, the more of us who talk, we demystify that. People would know that it's not everyone. By the way, I know so and so, and I know so and so and so and so and so who has not cut and who is opposed to this practice. So in a way, we are actually now giving another reference group. Instead of the reference group of we cut, we are expected to cut. All of us are supposed to. Now we are giving a new reference group of, I know of a group of people from this community who are not cutting. So guys, keep up.
Okay. I mean, that's actually very much close to what Sahiyo also uses as an approach. But before we get into any more of that, I have some good news. Molly is being able to join through audio, through a phone. So welcome, Molly. It's really great that you're finally able to join. And I hope can we do like, are you able to hear us?
I hear you very well. Do you hear me?
Yes, great. We can hear you. And so while we're waiting for you, we were talking a little bit about what social norms are, and we watched Maryan's really beautiful video. And since you are one of the leading experts on this subject, I'll just circle back a little and ask you, your organization has done so much work using the social norms approach. But so I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions, and then maybe you can take 3 or 4 minutes to respond to them. But how do you define a social norm? And since we talk about FGC being a social norm, how can norms like this be changed? Can they be changed? How can they be changed? And if you could give us some context from all of your years of experience working in Senegal and other countries, what can you tell us about this?
Yes, I would be happy to. And I'm so sorry for the technical issues I'm having, which is so strange. And I was so looking forward to this call, and I want to say hello to everybody and say how sorry I am. I did listen to Maryan, and she said a lot of what I was going to say about how we define a social norm. And I can just go over that briefly because we see there are 3 main things that you have to keep in mind when you are looking at different practices that may be upheld by social norms. And that is that the first one would be that it is a reciprocal expectation within a reference group, and that then there are sanctions, both positive and negative, if you follow the social norm, and if you don't follow the social norm, there are very negative sanctions. And the third thing that we say that is so important is the values. And I think Maryan brought that up. That is the value attached to that practice, which is upheld by a social norm, is a rule that is unwritten. It hasn't ever been, it's not in any book that you can read. And yet everybody in the reference group, as you called it, or the people who matter to you, they all know that this is what you do and this is what you don't do. And the person who doesn't follow it, again, can be marginalized and ostracized. And in the case of female genital cutting, which certainly meets that definition, because it definitely is an expectation, an interdependent, reciprocal expectation within that group of people who matter to each other, who have followed that practice or the tradition for so many years together. So given that, it's for us, we were very lucky because we had a very, one of the most intelligent participants we've ever had, who is a villager who never went to school. He's an imam, and he's a village chief who understood when we introduced the subject into our program, our 3-year education program, which does not have for a goal to end female genital cutting, but rather to inform people of the consequences in a non-judgmental way. Because we found that in our education program, if you go in the communities with the idea that you want to change them, that you have what we call psychological reactance. No one likes to be told what to do, and particularly when what they do has value to them. And for having an outsider come in, and these are people who are part of the ethnic group when they go in, they are facilitators of a program, they're of the same ethnic group, and yet still we are very careful and very sensitive about how they talk about the issue and how they address it. I mean, we do lots of training before they go into the communities and talk about these sensitive subjects. So rather, Dimba Jawara, who's the imam, told us that when you have a social norm in place, of course, he didn't say it as a social norm, but he said, when you have a practice that is highly valued by the community, you have to remember that it's not just a family, it's not just a community, it's a whole social network of people living not just in one village, but in many villages, and maybe even across the seas, even in Europe and America. And in order for a social norm to change, those people have to be really, they have to be talked to, discussed. You have to discuss this with them. They have to understand. They have to be on board. And when he told me this so long ago in 1997, when another community stood up alone to abandon, and he said, "This is not the way to do it." I said, "But how do you do that, Dimba?" And he said, "Well, I'll put on my shoes and I'll walk around to those people with whom we intramarry, and we will talk to them and discuss with them. We will give them the information they may not have known and talk about how important this is, and to abandon this practice, which has not brought well-being into our community, if we're honest with ourselves." Of course, he could do that as an imam, as a very respected community member, and that's what he did. And ever since 1997, Tostan has really followed his lead, and we have recognized more and more that it is the people themselves who are in the group that must be the ones that discuss this and not impose it, not in a judgmental way, or going in and saying you should abandon. It's just getting people talking, and I think Maryan talked about this, getting people discussing the experiences they've had, how a lot of girls have died, how many girls have hemorrhaged and had serious problems afterwards, and all of that has come up. And through are supporting them to go out and connect with the people that matter to them, whether it be in Senegal, they cross the border, they go into Gambia, because of course the ethnic group has no borders. So they go across the border, they talk to their family members, the people that they marry with. And because of that, in the communities where we've done our program and where people have reached out, they have come together, and I think you've heard about this, they come together and make these decisions together and said, okay, now all of us have to change so that no one will be ostracized, particularly the girls will have husbands. They will be respected members. They will not be seen as dirty and impure because they have not been through the practice. I better stop now because I could go on. And so you said 3 or 4 minutes. I think I've overextended my talk.
No, that's all right. But no, for sure, what you brought up some really interesting and important points about what it means to work to tackle a social norm, being an outsider to a community versus somebody who is a member of the community. And so this is a question I'd like to ask both of you. I mean, since Maryan, you as a member of your community, while you were in your community and raising these issues, you had to face a lot of backlash, and now even, and you continue to face a lot of backlash for, for trying to kind of get your own community to change a norm. Whereas, and Molly, you spoke about, how you follow the lead of members of the community, because that's the way to bring up. But there's also the whole aspect of sensitivity. So when we use perhaps you could both talk about what defines the elements of using a social norm approach as an activist. In what ways does sensitivity come into play? Like, for example, I know that, at Sahiyo, we choose to use the term female genital cutting rather than female genital mutilation, even though, there are definitely survivors who would prefer the term mutilation to describe their own experience. But, we make a conscious choice to use cutting because, we understand that there's a value judgment to the term mutilation. And when we use it with the community, it, makes them defensive, and then they don't want to engage with us. And so, so what, do you also face these kind of challenges, and, how do you go about being sensitive while you use the social norms approach?
Do you want me
Perhaps we could begin with you, Molly, and then Maryan.
Okay. Yes, we're extremely careful about the vocabulary we use. And this is, we've been told by multiple people, not just Dimba, but that the way you approach people with a certain amount, with respect, and that you're not looking down upon them. And we always say to people, you did it because you loved your daughters. You know, you have to go at them with the idea that, of course, mothers, what choice did they have? You either do this and see that your daughter may be rejected by the community. You know how your community holds this in importance for being respected, for being part of the community, for belonging. And of course, for people in rural communities, it's particularly important because it's a question of survival, quite frankly. People, when you belong to the community, you have the support of everyone. If a woman decides on her own to do something against the community, she risks actually not being able to survive. I mean, so we cannot judge this woman, and we cannot expect one person to stand up and abandon a practice when it means her own survival. So getting people together and in a way that really respects the values and the culture and particularly the values of the people, of being respectful and not condemning them, not being judgmental, as you said, is so important. And so we work with the communities who have decided to abandon and work with them on best ways to communicate to others around this on the radio and even at the declarations. And we have to work with the media so that they're not using this language. At first we saw, especially on the radio and especially in national languages, they had words that were very offensive to people, the way they described cutting, you know, and that's again why we use cutting and not mutilation, because mutilation means in the dictionary, cutting with the intention of harming someone. And they said, we don't want to harm our daughters. We love them. We want them to be respected and succeed. So it's a different way of framing this, of looking at this. And it's one of, first of all, for us, we think people need good information. I think using human rights, we have a human rights program where people go into deep discussion around rights of all people. We don't just do women's rights because that made the men very reactive and defensive and even shut down some of the centers. So we do human rights. Everybody has rights to be free from all forms of violence. And they get into deep discussion about if we want well-being in the community, and this is, you know, what we're doing is promoting community well-being, then how can we promote that? It's by doing healthy practices. And then they get the information and they start deliberating. Is this a practice that really is going to help to lead us to well-being in our community? But they're the ones who make the decision, and they make it collectively. And where we support them is reaching out to communicate with others about why they have chosen. It's not that we don't love our collective community. It's because we want to do things that now promote the well-being and not bring harm to any member of the community, and especially girls and mothers who will be our mothers and the women who are so important to the community. This is just a very brief explanation of what we do, but you're all welcome to come to our seminar. We do a 10-day seminar where we discuss that, and you go out to the village and talk to people about how they've reached out to their community members and what particularly supported them. But mainly, I would just add that it's because we let them know from the beginning of our 3-year program that we respect them and we respect their values, and we want them to describe what their vision for the future of well-being is for their community. And they know that we're not there to tell them to change, that we've come to say, you know, you should be ending this practice. They know that we don't do that at Chosan, and that makes a huge difference. We've had many villages who said we're not ready. Strangely, you know, 2 years later, they come to us and they say, we want to be part of the next declaration. We have decided. We just weren't ready. There's a time that's needed for reflection and discussion with others who have already abandoned. I think it's so important.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so many good points, but I'll just give Maryan an opportunity to respond as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm one of the survivors who uses female genital mutilation. And I believe my healthy organs, healthy functional organs were cut from my body, and that's what I call mutilation. Yes, for all the years that I worked, I had the privilege of actually working in the community that I come from, apart from when I was doing the dialogue, the policy and legal framework in the country, but I mostly worked in the part of the country where I come from. I come from the Somali community. So I had the privilege of language. I had the privilege of being an insider. And even so, the sensitivities were there because you need to be understood. You need people not to flee and freak away and think, you know, you are wrong, because it's so easy to politicize this End FGM agenda for anyone, whether you are from the community or from outside the community. It's very easy for anyone who is opposed to it to really politicize it. And for me personally, my own personal journey of questioning and change has always been like a pointer. There was a time I never questioned. I was taken through, I knew I was taken through something awful, never thought about it, never reflected on it, until the day I had that accidental conversation with this friend of mine who is not a Somali but a Muslim, and said she was not cut, and that was a big shocker. But that was the beginning of questioning, like who was on the right between she and I. And that accidental conversation really led me to do research and looking for information. And because then I started reflecting on how awful and how bad what I went through was, and I didn't want any other girl to go through it. So it's always been a pointer for me, even I, who had the privilege of being educated and you know, being a, you know, at the university at that moment, I was still not questioning. I didn't want to try and even put on the shoes of my mother or anyone who was like her. Yes, women do have their own agency in their own setup, in their own context, but this is one thing that no one was questioning. Nobody was putting a seed of doubt. No one was seeing it to be something out of the norm. Everyone thought to be a good girl, to be someone respectable, to be marriageable, to be a girl who was decent and morally upright. This is what you had to be taken through. So what my work with the community did was really begin to demystify some of the big chunks of you know, information that would help them begin question. What helped me question was knowing that not all Muslim girls were cut. And I started digging into what was the truth about this practice and Islam. And of course, the information was clear that it is not. It has no basis. It actually violates a lot of teachings on the sanctity of the human body and the rights women and girls have been given. So that for me was one of the biggest pillars that I was using in my community education, you know, like delinking it from Islam. And then while we are there, we get into all these conversations of now sexuality and rights and health, all of them from that perspective. We expected to be healthy and not harm our bodies. And then are we harming by doing 1, 2, 3, you know? So that is something like the avenue that I've always used. Are we today where I sit? I'm not employed by anyone. I have, again, the privilege of having social media and reaching out a number of people and just talking my mind and just being me, opposed to this practice, wanting to protect girls, and just putting the information out there for whoever who has access. And yeah, but the sensitivities are there. But while the sensitivities are there, the goal is what? The goal is to protect girls from this practice, for them not to be cut. So we need to really balance, in as much as we are being very respectful, also not to give so much regard to because I have never seen anywhere where people are excused for spanking their kids, and anyone saying, yes, you spank your kids, it's okay because it's your culture, because that's how you're brought up. So this is one element that always we begin the sensitivities of, are we interfering? Are we imposing? Are we being colonial? I think that fear it needs to be there, but needs to be in the background, not really like in the forefront and really curtail us. So if I was to work in any other community that I don't have the language, advantage of language, advantage of background and everything, definitely I think the sensitivities will be more. But being an insider right now, as I say, 98% practice, I don't know when I'll get out of there, because that is huge. I think we take the lead, and it's huge, and the girls need saving in all these 92 countries.
I mean, I'm really glad you mentioned all of this, because it really highlights the difference between working as somebody who's an insider to the community and working in the same field to tackle the same social norm, but someone who's not an insider. And in the interest of time, we started this webinar a little late, so I'll ask one final question before moving to Q&As from the audience. But the final question is linked to one question that we already have from an attendee. It's basically, we've been talking so much about the social norms approach, but over the years, since the onset of the movement and of various movements against or to end female genital cutting, there have been multiple different types of approaches. And we see all the time that whenever we introduce this topic of FGC to somebody who's not heard of it before, the instinct is to first ask, is there a law against it? That a lot of people believe that taking a legal approach is an ideal way to put an end to a harmful practice. And we know through statistics and through that this isn't true, and you can both shed some light on that. But so we know there is a legal approach, there is an approach of focusing only on the medical and health aspect of the negative consequences of FGC on health. And so there are many different types of approaches towards ending FGC. And do you think that all of these different types of approaches are equally important, or do you feel that organizations and activists in this field need to move more towards a social norms approach? Like, do these approaches complement each other, and are they all equally necessary, or do we really need to be shifting towards a social norms approach? Molly, would you like to go first?
No, I think for me it's a balance, because I think education is the most important thing that you can do. I just want to add too, when I heard Maryan talking, I want everybody to know that I am not the person who goes into communities. It is people who are of the same ethnic group that have undergone the practice, who are survivors of the practice, who are the ones who are in the communities facilitating our education program in national languages. We work in 22 national languages, and we always do that. And this is why people can bring this topic up. But what we found is that at first I was against the law, because we were seeing that when people got the information and were allowed to have the means to go out and reach out to their family, and they were the ones who were going through the program, would reach out to their own community and then to their interconnected communities, their intramarrying communities, with an understanding of social norms that you do give. You know that people give this value, and so you're careful about how you address it. And so that was working, and people were coming together and deciding together to abandon. So I thought, I was against the law at first, but then afterwards I saw that those people who had abandoned actually said they were using the law. They were telling people, okay, there is a law, but we also have the reasons why there is a law. The government is there to protect girls and save girls from this practice. They're having so many problems. They're hemorrhaging. They can have problems at childbirth, and there's many who have died from this in Senegal and other countries, in Mali and the countries where we work in West Africa. And so, but the law, I do believe, alone cannot do it. And the people have told us, if you come in and tell us and force us, we will, to stop this practice, we will find a way to do it underground. It doesn't work. We will be angry and defensive. Let us, they've all said, let us have the time to reach out. But then after we've reached out and people decide, and if they break the pact that they make at the declaration, and this has happened many times, that those who have declared and that then went on, for example, a cutter in the region of Tambacounda in Senegal, they found out that she had cut 6 girls in another village that had not declared. They took her to the police and she was put in prison. And they said, this is what we will do now, because we have made a pact as a collective group. We believe this is a community law now, not one that is imposed by the government on us. We have made the decision, and if people break this, that you will be punished. You will be sanctioned for that. And they make it publicly known. So it's the people themselves who are the ones who are actually denouncing this now. And there was a study done on that, and Bettina Shell Duncan wrote on this, and she also said the same thing. What she found throughout Senegal and Gambia was that the law is only effective if people have gone through an education program, an empowering education program, where they have come to making collective decisions, and where they're the ones who are enforcing this together.
Right. Yeah, that's really helpful to know. Yeah, and really good point. Maryan, would you like to add to that? Yeah.
Oh, thanks. I think Molly has really covered more. I would just like to say that the law, anyone can hide from it anytime. So it really takes the willing heart and the willing mind. And so we have to win the minds and the hearts. But the law is a great fallback. It's a great fallback. It has to be there. I support the fact that countries need to really enact laws to protect girls from this, but it's not the panacea. It's not that if you have law, then you have accomplished. And even when the law is being made, it depends on where you are and who is making that law, and even themselves. Like when in Kenya we were working towards making the prohibition of FGM law. That bill was first of all in the sexual offences bill in 2006 when it was being presented, which is an act now, and FGM was thrown out. Parliamentarians were like, if you want everything else to pass, through out FGM. And so we had to go back to the drawing board. And for us, we had to take time to really educate parliamentarians themselves and really, take them through why we wanted an FGM standalone. But that was going to be like a fallback. And anyone who wanted, for example, to use the law, you had a law to protect, but it's not the only thing. Education is a must, demystifying all these beliefs, countering the narratives, trying to create a new reference group for people to know that it's not everyone who's doing this. Is where the bulk of the work needs to be. But yeah, so the law for me is a fallback. It needs to be there, but it's not the only thing.
Yeah, we totally agree on that, Maryan. Totally.
Yeah, absolutely. And so before we move on, I'd like to ask attendees if you have any questions for any of the panelists. Please type your questions in the Q&A box, and we can pick them up. And meanwhile, I believe
I'm seeing a question there, and
yeah,
from Ibtisam.
Right. Oh, it's in the chat box. Okay. Ibtisam is asking, she said she's curious about the shame exploration in social norms. Many people spare their daughters, but pretend that they have got the cut done. So the issue is absent, but it's implicit. So that's actually very true. Many people in the Bora community that we work in as well, they're increasingly choosing not to cut their daughters, but then in their families, to the elders, they'll just pretend that they've already had their daughters cut. So that's the best way they have found to be able to protect their daughters while also working in, continuing to survive in the community, and not be excommunicated or shamed. Do you see that as well in the communities that you work with, both of you?
Yeah, I think I've seen that even in my own family. There was a time I had a discussion with an aunt of mine who is a medical doctor, who was not cut. She doesn't come from a community that is cutting. She's married into a family, and she really wanted, because of the pressure she was facing from the husband, to do a pretend. And like I was up in arms because this was family. But the truth of the matter is, that's how some people, like, they just want to quiet it and just sort of like keep quiet. It's not easy. I'll tell you, it's not easy to be in a community where majority of the people want to pretend or are still doing this, and be the only one who really stands out. And then people don't look at the protection you're giving. They don't look at the good you're doing for. They're looking at, you're discussing genitalia, you're discussing your daughter's genitalia in public. Now they take elements to shame you and, you know, shut you down with. So it really takes a lot of, I don't know whether I can even call it courage. It just takes a lot of really just wanting to stand for something. I want to stand for girls. I want to say no. I want to really paint for my people that it's not everyone, it's not every girl from that community who is cut. My daughter is not cut, so we cannot say all. So for me, that has been my agenda. It's not an easy thing. It's not an easy place to be in. Nobody would want to be at that point, because if you find the kind of comments I get on Facebook by talking about this, it's very personal. Like, you know, people asking me, did your husband miss any taste in you? Is that why you are divorced? You know, it really gets very, very personal. Nobody would ever want to be in that position. But at the end of the day, if the agenda is really saving this another girl from going through what I went through, let all the names fall, let everything be said. At least don't endanger my life or the life of anyone in my family. So yes, I have seen that. And I think it's the only way some of these women would really like want to be part of the community, but also save their girls from this bad thing. But if we have to paint a new reference group for the community, a new group of people that they know who are not cutting, that is not going to help us. We need to be loud, we need to be speaking, we need to be telling our stories.
Absolutely. There's also a related question from Renee about whether girls or women who are pretending feel the pressure to keep a secret. I mean, I think often the girls themselves are maybe too young to know that this secret is that, you know, that their parents have fabricated a story. But yeah, I mean, is there something you'd like to add about that, Maryan or Molly, perhaps? Do you see a pressure of keeping a secret when people hide the fact that they haven't cut their daughters? And that's definitely linked to the kind of shaming that you know, comes from not following a norm.
I mean, most of the women we found never wanted, not even to talk about abandoning, but even talk about it among their community, because they were afraid that people would accuse them of not respecting traditions, of not being good women. And so it was when somebody, like when a person like Dimba, who was respected in the community, who was an imam, who came to talk to them, and I asked one woman, I said, when you found out that this other group had abandoned, did that help you? And she, when you heard it on the radio? And she said, no, it's only when he came and he brought it up, but I couldn't bring it up, even though I was against it, you know? And then I found out, I was shocked. When I brought it, when he came in and talked to all of us about this, and he came with the village chief and the other imam from my village, and we all said, this is not a religious obligation. This is not in the Quran. And so if it's harming us, we need to stop. And she said, I was shocked because everyone agreed. She said, I thought that if I stood up alone, that people would be angry with me, and that they would ostracize me. And also, I mean, again, we found that what really helps, I mean, I admire Maryan and your courage. It's just in the communities we work in, what we found helpful is when you do have a group of women who support one another, And this is why we don't even bring up female genital cutting until much later in our program, when they trust each other, they know each other, they talk openly for the first thing about things they've never discussed before, and they learn information on exactly what happens to them. Many of them had no idea what happened to them. And then we find that, you know, in Mali, we had one woman who told me that 2 of her daughters suffered greatly from the cutting. And she said, when at one instance where she took her daughter when they were doing multiple girls at the same time, and she said she went to get her daughter's t-shirt and she was standing in a flood. She said it felt like a river of blood and skin. And it was so just so amazing when she said that. She said, I will never do this to my next, if I have another daughter, I'll never do it. And she said, so I didn't cut the next daughter. I told her at one point, but I told her she must never tell anyone. And she said, what's strange is that her husband, when she was married and she had a daughter, she said, I'm not going to cut the daughter. And the husband said, well, you're cut, so why wouldn't you do this to your daughter? So he never even knew that she wasn't cut, the daughter wasn't cut. I think that when she answered, she said, we are part of the declaration that happened in this community, and I will not be the one to actually go against that pact that we made as Barbara. We keep our word. I will not do this to my daughter, but she actually didn't tell him. It's hard. It's hard because it does. You're afraid because men, they associate this with, you know, oh well, you know, then my wife will be promiscuous. That's what some men say here. They said if you don't cut them, they're promiscuous, and if you marry a woman who's not cut, she will be promiscuous. And so there's this idea, this stereotype around this, and that's really hard. And perhaps it's with the younger girls in the community are the ones who won't have to suffer that discrimination. Because we work with, in our program, we include the men always, and they're very involved and engaged. And particularly we do seminars for the religious leaders always. Before we even begin our program, we start with the imams, and because we work in mostly Muslim countries. So it's very important that they really be on board with the human rights, and that those are values, those are the human rights principles, they correspond, they align with their religious values, and also with the African wisdom of we use proverbs and African wisdom to show this is really deep in your culture too, that you do not harm people. So, I mean, all of that is very important.
I think you're sort of answering another question that one of the attendees has, which is how can we make this conversation easy to digest? Have you found something that works?
Yeah, for me, I think in the community, when I was working back in the community, as I said, I was lucky to be working in the community that I came from. When you talk about, like, for example, the harms and all this, everything would be summed up in a very short sentence: Allah's will. You know, you're sick, Allah's will. You're cut, you overbleed, you die, Allah's will. You are a woman, obstructed labor, you die, Allah's will. So that element wasn't like going to be the conversation opener. So the conversation opener was like going direct, and that's why it is context by context. So it was going direct, but going direct, we didn't go to the community. We started with the religious leaders themselves, because they would oppose you from the mosque the moment they had FGM being discussed, because then they would say it's not a priority. We don't have water. People are hungry. This and that. You can't talk, you know, about FGM. So we had to begin discussing with them. And I was not the person facilitating anything with them. I had non-Somali religious scholars. If you Google religious-oriented approach, like that document is there online. So the non-Somali religious scholars were chosen because they don't come from that background. They don't have the cultural baggage these ones have. FGM doesn't mean anything to them like it means to the imams they're sitting with. So they had like a more clearer head of now discussing verses, and you know, that really would help in educating the community. And once we did that, we were now able to get into the community and demystify that it wasn't Islamic, and it was not. Someone asked me, did I, you know, like, was there anything before I relocated? I just want to answer that. I think I decided to come to Canada for studies. And at that moment, the push factor for me was what I was in, you know, like it was a fright moment, I think. But again, I was seated on a privileged seat where I was able to apply to a university and get admitted and leave the country for study. So not every other woman has that opportunity, I know. But for me, that was the fright moment I did. Like, I didn't want my daughter to continue being in a situation where every day she was reminded of what she was losing. I didn't want people body shaming her, and I didn't want people scaring her, and I didn't want people making her lose faith in me and what I was telling her.
Right. Absolutely. So we're now, in the interest of time, I think we can wrap up now. It's been absolutely lovely to talk to both of you. And, you know, I want to, I believe there is a video that I had made as part of the Voices to End Fgmc project, which we could skip, I think, in the interest of time. But I'd like to leave, you know, this wonderful discussion with a final point and a sort of a question for both our panelists, which is, you know, FGC is one kind of social norm, but there are many other practices that are followed as social norms that can also be harmful. So how can our understanding of social norms help us in changing other practices which are upheld by, you know, other harmful practices that are upheld by norms? Yeah, as closing comments, are there any, is there any way you would like to respond to that? Perhaps Maryan first and then Molly?
Yeah, I think there are very many other practices that are not good for the welfare and development of the people that's applied to, that are actually social norms. And one that comes to mind is, for example, child marriage. The community that I come from has child marriage. They justify it as religious also. They justify it to mean it's a way to protect the girls before they become corrupted and they waste themselves and become, in not so clear terms, we become prostitutes, quote unquote. So this is all, yeah, like thereafter. So we can still look at that and really take through the different, you know, like, is it followed by many people? Is it expected that that's what's to be done? Because you go to the language, there are sayings, you know, a girl either has to be in a house or in the grave, you know, like that's all she is for. A girl is ready cooked meat, you know, it's a hilibisil in Somalia, like it's ready cooked meat. So all this really sort of like put that pressure of really wanting to get rid of, you know, like pushing her into marriage, like that's what she's valued for. A young girl, a 6-year-old, you're sweeping the compound and you're told, is this how you're going to sweep the compound when you're taken in? You make the bed. Is this how you're going to make the bed for your husband? 6 years old. So you were brought up knowing you're on transition, you're moving, you're going somewhere, you know. And then it's made it so rosy, like, you know, this is like the younger you're married, the better, the more successful and all this. So we can still apply. Does it have value? Do many people, you know, subscribe to it? And then what is the one thing that we can get in through and start, help people begin to question and really have a number that is able to overturn this. So I think that comes to mind. But I would like to also say that we keep talking about social norms now, but many organizations would really go into a community for 3 months, 5 months, 6 months, and then have a celebration and call that a public declaration. That is a huge challenge, I think, and a disservice to really this approach, because this approach has to naturally flow into having that declaration. It's not something that, like, you know, we should bring it from outside. It should come from them and the community to really be able to say, now we want to declare it publicly, you know, like we want to put it out there. We are not doing. I'm hoping and praying one day my community can do that. In terms of marriage, we are now seeing a situation where the men from my community are going to the coastal region in Kenya and getting married because the coast does not practice FGM. Now we are using that, you know, if you are afraid your girls will be shamed, if you are afraid your daughters will not be married, if you are afraid, you know, your daughters will be called loose and this and that, now look what the men are doing. So I hope that message can also sink and begin to make sense and show people that girls have not been created to just be married. Girls have a lot bigger other purpose and value, and girls can be important community members, and they don't have to suffer, they don't have to be cut, they don't have to be hurt, they don't have to be pained. That is my parting shot. Thank you.
Thank you. Molly?
Yeah, we were so glad that the social norms came into the FGC, and then afterwards we started working on early childhood development. And as we were discussing how parental practices and how we could support communities in better supporting their children, because so many children are having trouble when they first go to school. They've never seen books. They don't speak French, and they go to school and they have to learn in French. And so we were trying to think of how Tostan could support them, because there weren't kindergartens in the villages. There was no preschooling. And what we found was that there were social norms in place around the way you bring up babies. And one of the things, I'll just give you an example, is that almost everyone, what we discussed within Western Senegal, in Senegal and West Africa, because in the other countries it was very similar, is mothers don't look at their babies in the eyes. Because they are afraid that there are evil spirits that could enter and harm their children. Again, they were protecting, they were doing it out of love. And we realized that it was a social norm because it was a value. It was a reciprocal expectation from within the people who are the same ethnic group, particularly the Fulani group and the Tukulurs in the north. They absolutely believed that people who talked and interacted with their babies, that this could bring harm to their babies, that the spirits would be jealous, and they had other children die, and so they were trying to protect their babies so they would not talk to their babies. So we all know how important interacting with babies, looking in their eyes as you're breastfeeding, we know how important that is. So we realized they needed good information. So we did brain development. Our whole module is based on understanding how the brain develops and how you can really cognitively stimulate your baby. But beyond that, what we realized is that we had to educate not only the women in the class, but the other women had to know about this, and the mother-in-laws, particularly, and the other relatives that come to visit, they had to be informed of this also, because when they would come, they would say, "Stop, what you're doing is dangerous. Don't look in your baby's eyes. Don't talk to them. Don't interact with them. This is very dangerous. It can harm your baby." So then the reason we had the participants reach out and talk to them and discuss with them about brain development. I mean, about neurons and synapses, and everybody said the villagers, and they do that. And we said, of course, they love to learn. They love learning. And when they learned about it and they understood that this is new scientific information, not only in Africa, but in America, it's fairly new also. It's just fairly recently in the last 20 years that people know how important it is to interact with the baby. But we learned so much from what we had done with FGC that we could apply the same principles, knowing that this had values for the people. So, for example, they put amulets on their babies' arms. We say, yes, protect them with the amulets that you use, but also know that you can look in the babies in the eyes, you can interact with them, and this will help them when they go to school. You can really help your child to think, to do critical thinking skills, to be able to, do all the different activities of analysis and critical thinking that are necessary for when you go into school. So we've had great success with that, and they've reached out and we really were thankful that we had learned. And of course, I give credit to Demba Jawara, because he was the one who really informed us. But then the academics also sort of reinforced and just really praised Demba, because this is a lot of the people like Dr. Jerry Mackey and others, Christina Bicchieri, who work so much on social norms, really felt that this was one way that you could use that theory of social norms to help in the work you're doing in the field.
Right. I mean, thank you both for giving us these insights into other kinds of social norms and how the approach that is used to abandon FGC can also be used in these other situations. I hope this has been a helpful webinar for everybody, and I'll hand it back to Ellen to for closing remarks.
Yeah, thanks so much to our speakers for that engaging discussion, and to Arifa for brilliantly moderating it. Before we end our webinar today, I would just like to leave you with some resources and information. So Meg, if you can bring up the slides, the closing slides. So on this slide here, you can see that our website is sahiyo.org. Here you'll find opportunities to volunteer and intern with us, as well as various resources and information packs. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Sahiyo Voices. I'll also be sharing in the chat box the 2 organizations that our speakers are involved with. Kate or Meg, if you can go on to the next slide, please. Thanks so much. And finally, we just want to say thanks again to our moderator and guest speakers who shared their knowledge, expertise, and experience with us. This led to a very interesting discussion. I learned so much from it, so I hope the audience did too. And if you have any questions or want more information, please reach out to us at info@sahiyo.com. And thanks so much for joining, and have a lovely weekend.